Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update. Join the only official Telegram channel of Rao Zai Study Circle to get relevant material and important updates. Important announcement. First batch of QIP or Quality Improvement Program has already begun on 12th of this month. QIP classes would cover up more relevant and sought after topics for the upcoming prelims examination. This program would cover history, polity, geography and environment, science and technology, economy and international relations in 50 hours. Next batch of QIP would start on 3rd of May 2021. Hello everyone and welcome to Daily News Simplified, where we venture into what, why and how of daily current affairs published in the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper. Articles dated 19th of April 2021, which are put up for today's discussion, are listed on your screen, and the time-stamping for the same is provided in the description box. So let us start with the first article itself. Well, the first article in the discussion lineup is related to your UPSC syllabus of art and culture. This is very much relevant for your prelims examination as well as for your general studies paper 1. This article was published on the 4th page of the Hindu newspaper Delhi edition. This article actually talks about an important medieval India temple, that is Lingaraja temple. This temple was in news for, of course, the emergency cause which we are seeing across the world, especially in India. This temple, which is situated in the Bhubaneswar town of Odisha, is a Hindu temple dedicated to the Lord Shiv. UPSC has been very proactive in asking questions related to the temples in the prelims examination, so you must pay special attention to this discussion specially. Lingaraja temple is the largest temple of Bhubaneswar town. It was completed in around 11th century AD. It belongs to the Kalinga architecture and also the dual style. It is believed to be built by the kings of Somvanshi dynasty. So UPSC can also ask you about the Somvanshi dynasty and where it was ruling. So this dynasty was ruling in the eastern part of India, especially the current state of Odisha. Now let us see something about Kalinga architecture. Well, Kalinga architecture derives its name from the ancient Kalinga rulers of Odisha. You must have read. If not, Kalinga was the area which was existing even during the Mauryan periods. And the Kalinga war between Kalinga rulers and the Mauryan rulers, that is Ashok, is very relevant from the perspective of ancient history. This style consists 3 distinct types of temples: Rekha Dual, Pida Dual and Khakra Dual. Rekha and Pida Dual are associated with Vishnu, Surya and Shiva. UPSC has already asked questions on these 3 gods under Hindu religion and temples associated with them. Khakra Dual is associated with the Durga temples. The eastern part of India is very relevant as far as female goddesses and their religious practices are concerned. The same is true with the Durga Puja, which is very much practiced in Bengal. The same is also true with a very important temple in Assam, that is Kamakhya temple. Rekha Dual and Khakra Dual houses are the sanctum sanctorum. It is a place where the image or the idols of god or goddesses are kept, while the Pida Dual constitutes outer dancing and offering players. So in a temple, we will find that there are different parts. Each part is dedicated to a different functioning. So sanctum area is dedicated to the practice of keeping the idols of gods and goddesses. On the other hand, Pida Dual is for dancing and offering prayer. So devotees, when they visit a temple, they offer dancing and other things and other practices actually. So they are being provided a separate space in the temple. Now let us see what is Kalinga architecture through this image. This image shows different types of architecture under Dual or Kalinga architecture. The architecture in the pink color is Rekha Dual. It is the highest area or the highest shrine in a temple. It is also called as Shikhara in a Nagar architecture. It has a Garbhagriha or this lower portion where the images or the idols of deities or god and goddesses are kept. The second part that is painted in the yellow color is Pida Dual, which we have already talked about. And the last one is Khakra Dual, which is also the front part of the temple. All these 3 different parts have different architecture, designs and patterns. The dual style. This style has 4 basic components. First being the Vimana. Vimana is also called as Shikhara in the Nagara style. Vimana is a structure which contains the sanctum. So this part of the temple, that is the top layer, is also known as Vimana. The second part is Jagmohana, which is also known as assembly hall, the place where devotees sit together, sing, dance and offer prayers. Next is Nat Mandira. Nat Mandira is a festival hall. So people gather here on this Nat Mandira whenever the festival takes place. And the last one is Bhog Mandapa, a hall of offering. So whenever devotees arrive to a temple, they visit a temple, they offer sweets, flowers, sometimes even cash to the god. And that place where they do all these offerings is known as Bhog Mandap. So UPSC can ask you what Jagmohana is associated in the temple architecture. They may even ask you what do you mean by Vimana, Nat Mandira or Bhog Mandapa in the temple architecture in India. Each part of this temple increases in height to its predecessor. It simply means that when you go from 4 to 1, the height of these structures keep on increasing. Now, going through the past questions related to the temple architecture. UPSC has been very proactive in asking questions from this area. So you must read the temple architecture right from the ancient India till today in much detail. In 2019, that is 2 years back, UPSC has asked the building Kalyan Mandapa was notable feature in the temple construction in the kingdom of. They have simply asked the name of the kingdom. Answer is Vijayanagar. If you have read the 12th NCERT of history, you will find this to be mentioned in clear terms. In 2017, UPSC has asked questions related to the famous sun temples. They have just asked the basic theme of a temple. So they have asked which of the following are famous for sun temples. So they are also asking the questions related to the theme or the objective for which temples are built. If you know the answer, well, the answer is first, that is Arsavali, and the other two are not associated with the sun temples. If you just read across the temples dedicated to Lord Shiva and Lord Vishnu, you can easily identify the wrong answer. Well, Omkareshwar is one of the Jyotirling in India, and by that mean it says that Omkareshwar is a temple dedicated to Lord Shiva, and if the temple is dedicated to the Lord Shiva, it automatically becomes a wrong option. Hence your answer is 1 by eliminating the 3. Moving ahead to the next article. The next article is related to a very important theme of your environment and ecology, that is energy saving certificates or green contracts. Well, this article was published on the 7th page of the Hindu newspaper. This article is about the green production or green energy production, green contribution by the corporates in an economy, energy efficiency in the process of industrialization. This article also talks about the green contracts, process to achieve green contracts, and how to make green contracts more effective in countries like India. Now, why do we need green contracts? Well, it's simple. Corporates, like any other entities, also take benefit from the environment and society. So when you buy a product from a corporate entity, take any example. When you buy a laptop, you are paying something to a corporate entity. You are paying the price and other profits. So they make a profit from the society, from the environment. So they must also contribute back by cutting down the emission through the process of green contracting. So once they go into a contract which is known as green contract, they would be able to reduce the emissions which they are making to the environment. This would also be beneficial for achieving the green economy target. Now, this is the talk of the town. Every economy across the world, be it developed or the developing economy, is talking about reducing the emissions of carbon and achieve the green economy targets. What is a green contract? It simply means a commercial contract. So it is not a voluntary contract for say, it is a commercial contract. It is based on buying and selling in a market. It refers to a commercial contract which mandates, so it is a compulsory. It mandates that contracting party cut down the greenhouse gas emissions at different stages of delivery of goods and services. So let's say there's a company which is producing cars. So when a company produces a car, they take multiple products in their production process. These multiple products could be using plastics, using metals, using different chemicals for their production. And ultimately, they also transport these products to different markets and different cities. In the process, they are violating the green standards at the global level. So at every stage of production of goods and services and also at the delivery stage, they must try to reduce the greenhouse gas emission. So these stages or these different stages of delivery include design, manufacturing, transportation, operation, waste disposal as applicable to the industry. The process of acquiring a green contract. Now, how a company or an entity can acquire a green contract? Well, the process is simple as per the article. This contract could be taken up as a bidding process. So companies can come together on a bidding platform and they can bid how much they want to save or how much they can save the greenhouse gases. In this bidding process, the green tenders are issued for under the green qualification. Green tenders is nothing but a offer document. So it is offered to the public, the bidding or the new companies which want to bid. They come to the tender, they provide all the necessities which they can provide, they make an offer in that process. And green qualification here simply means that they have to meet certain level of qualification in order to get into the process. So it is very simple. Suppose there are 10 companies and they want to come in a bidding process and they all are saying that we will save X amount of carbon dioxide, or in the process of making a product, we will save X amount of CO2. However, 9 out of 10 companies meet the green qualification. That is the process through which they can do it. However, the 10th entity or the 10th company does not meet certain qualification in order to reduce the emission of CO2. Hence, in order to get a green contract, all these companies should come together under the green tender, meet the green qualification and fight under a similar bidding process to get that contract. Well, what are these green qualifications? Well, these could be predetermined percentage of green energy in service delivery, or it could be adequate on-site waste management. So out of 10 companies which come off the bidding, let's say one of them does not have on-site waste management system. So they automatically becomes disqualified in this process. It could also be reducing the carbon emission by a certain level over a period of time. So 9 out of 10 company can say that we can reduce the CO2 level in the period of 9 years or maybe 10 years or 5 years. On the other side, the leftover company, the one company out of 10 says that it may take 20 years to do the same thing, as they automatically becomes disqualified. Once a bidder is chosen, the contracting parties can prescribe the green obligation bindings and enforceables in the eye of the law. So once a partners are selected in the process, they come to a contract, they sign a contract, and this contract is a obligation which is binded on all the parties which are part of the contract, and it is enforced under a particular law. This obligation make parties to follow emission cuts as well. How this could be achieved? How we can achieve green contracting in an economy or in a production process where corporates can also participate? Well, this could be achieved through use of energy efficient infrastructure for production. Assume this: using a metro train in an urban town and using a personalized vehicle which is more efficient. Of course, the metro train. So if we are having an infrastructure which is energy efficient, we definitely be able to reduce the CO2 emission in the economy. And the same is true with the corporate houses. If they are building a factory and the infrastructure is very efficient, that they can reduce the CO2 level just by building a good factory. Next is reducing noise while producing a factory. Well, this is a straightforward. So lesser the voice you produce while working in a factory, the better you are. Next is reducing water pollution and the air pollution. So those factories or those entities which are producing less water pollution and air pollution are more beneficial or are more likely to get into a green contract. Next is ensuring eco-friendly means of transportation such as bicycles, electric cars. Next is establishing and maintaining a sustainable waste management system. Let us assume there's a company which is producing plastic. So if they do not have a sustainable waste management system, they are actually putting more pollutants in the environment than what they are actually removing. So they need a sustainable waste management system. Next is putting up green buildings. Green buildings simply means buildings which have less energy consumption, they have better lighting facilities, and they have better cooling facilities. So they literally save the energy for consumption. And the last one is centralized waste to energy plants. Assume that in an industrial area there are 50 different industrial units and they are producing different products. Someone is producing iron and steel products, someone is producing textiles, the other one is producing dyes, and then the other one producing plastics. All of them, if come together to collect their waste at a single point and convert that waste into energy, burn that waste through different process and produce the energy and utilize that energy to run their own factories. In that process, they will qualify or be able to achieve higher energy efficiency. Now, how to make these obligations work? Okay, it is good to have such kind of obligations, but how do we make them work together? How can we put them into place? It's not like that we just make the rules and attract the business people to come and follow them. That is not the case. We have to bring some kind of mechanism so that whatever government is looking at, whatever the mechanism is available in the market, larger and larger number of players come into play and participate in it. For that matter, just provide measurement criteria and audit of the performance. So until and unless there is audit and measurement, how can we say that factory A is more polluting and the factory B is not? So we should have some kind of audit and performance criteria for them. Next is non-performance could be penalized by fines and penalties. Simply, if you are polluting the environment more, you should be penalized more, despite the fact that you are part in the contract. Making sure that all the stakeholders participate in the obligations and practice them in letter and spirit. So if there are 50 factories in an industrial area, government or the private entity should make it sure that all of them come together and participate in this green contract. And lastly, cost of contract and the additional prices should be as less as possible to make them more attractive. Assume this. The cost of contract is, let's say, 10 crore rupees. And if a company does not go into the contract, the actual price turn out to be 5 crore rupees. So why a company would venture into such a high cost contract when they can save money without being into the contract? So the contract or the green contract should be very, very effective as far as pricing is concerned, so as to attract more and more players. Now we come across an important term, although this term was not mentioned in the article, but this is a kind of initiative which is functioning in India as far as green contracting is concerned. Perform, achieve and trade. Well, this is a separate scheme run by Government of India. Well, this is a submission or a sub-component of National Action Plan on Climate Change, which is a very, very important point and you should read on that. It was launched by Bureau of Energy Efficiency, which is working under the Ministry of Power. UPSC can also ask you about the entities and the ministries under which they are working. So Ministry of Power is the entity where this scheme is working. PAT or PAT is a market-based mechanism. So it is a kind of a commercial contract to set up and incentivize energy efficiency in large energy intensive industries. So here the keyword is large. So MSME, micro, small and medium enterprises are not part of this scheme. It covers over 478 designated consumers. Now consumers here means the one who is consuming the energy. So designated consumers from 8 energy intensive sectors. So 8 energy intensive sectors have already been selected. These are thermal power, aluminium, cement, fertilizers, iron and steel, pulp and paper, textiles and chloralkali. This sector accounts for 45% of India's primary energy consumption. This is very high. So if India turn out to be a beneficial country and control these kind of industries for polluting the environment, India will be able to control at least 45% of its emission of CO2 or greenhouse gases. These industries together consume 165 million tons equivalent of energy consumption annually, which is very high. It facilitates the DCs, that is the designated consumers, to achieve their legal obligation. As we have discussed previously, green contracts are legal obligations under Energy Conservation Act 2001. But they also provide them with the necessary market-based incentives. Market-based incentive means they can sell their emission targets. So it is a necessary market-based incentive to overachieve the targets set for them. Assume that a company has set a target to reduce the CO2 by 1 million ton. However, it turned out to be 2 million tons. Now they have outperformed others. They have overachieved their targets. So they should be compensated for this benefit. DCs who have achieved reduction in the baseline specific energy consumption in excess of their target will be entitled to sell. This is another keyword, sell e-certs. What are e-certs? Energy saving certificate. Let us assume this through a simple example. Let us say there is a company which has target to reduce CO2 by 1 million tons equivalent. However, it turned out to be saving about 2 million tons of CO2 equivalent. Now they have done a tremendous or good job in order to save the CO2. For that, they can sell the e-certs in the market. So once they overachieve their targets, they will get e-certs or energy saving certificates, and they can sell these certificates in the market, and they will get what? They will get a price for them. So doing good can actually help them to earn good as well. DCs who underachieve, that is, let's say they targeted for 1 million ton, but their actual achievement was 0.5 million ton. So DCs who have underachieved their targets can comply by purchasing. This is another one. So one who have made benefits will sell, and the one who have made losses will purchase. So the one who is purchasing this energy saving certificate will pay to the one who is selling. So if you are doing good as far as environment is concerned, you will earn, and the one who is not doing good will make losses. This is nothing but a kind of initiative to encourage those industries to produce under energy efficiency. E-certs to be traded only on electricity exchanges such as IEX. So you cannot sell these certificates in the open market. You cannot sell the certificates in the stock market. You have to take the certificates, whether you are a buyer or a seller, to electricity exchanges. Penalty for non-compliance in accordance to the Electricity Conservation Act 2001. So whatever the penalty is being provided or is charged on the failure of the targets is under the Electricity Conservation Act 2001. Also, the amount of unmet target to be paid at the prevailing oil prices. And lastly, we see the salient features of e-certs or energy saving certificates. They are mandatory, they are targeting the designated consumers. The buyers are those which are not achieving their targets. The sellers are those which are achieving their targets. The targets include 6.6 million ton equivalent of CO2 for their first cycle. The mechanism is nothing but cap and trade. Cap means the cap of 1 million ton. This is an example. Cap of 1 million ton. If you go beyond this, you can trade. The time frame is 3 years, that within the 3 years you can achieve X amount of targets. E-certs, one e-cert equals to 1 million ton of equivalent oil. Okay, so once you have achieved this amount of target, you will be provided one e-cert. Until and unless you achieve 1 MTOE, you will not be provided e-certs. So once you achieve this, go to the market, go to the electricity exchange, sell this, and you will get money out of it. The trading platform is only the power exchange or the electricity exchange. The penalty is as per the ECA, which we have already discussed, and the compliance period is of 3 years. Moving ahead to the next article. Well, this article is related to a recent ordinance which was promulgated by the president. This article actually talks about a recent reforms which a government is trying to bring in order to reduce the number of tribunals which are functioning in India. The Tribunal Reforms, Rationalization and Condition of Service Ordinance 2021 was promulgated recently. This ordinance dissolves certain existing appellate bodies and transfer their functions. So it simply transfer the existing function of those appellate bodies to other existing judicial bodies, basically high courts. The rationalization of tribunals was proposed in the budget 2021-22. In this budget, the finance minister proposed that they will rationalize, and rationalize here simply means they will reduce the number of tribunals and also they will transfer their function to the other bodies in order to reduce the multiplicity of appellate mechanism in India. For example, under this ordinance, the Cinematograph Act 1952, which had its own appellate tribunal, will now be transferred to the respective high courts. As per the Finance Act 2017, which is actually the base of all this rationalization, this act empowered the central government to notify rules on qualification of members of the tribunals, terms and conditions of their services, composition of search and selection committees. These search and select committees will actually search new members which can be appointed to such tribunals. This search and selection committee will identify people for 19 tribunals, including tribunals for customs, excise, service tax and related others. Now, what is the rationale? Why government is trying to bring a rationalization of tribunals? Well, India is one of the leading country in terms of backlog of cases. So in India, cases remained backlog for years, sometimes even decades. So that requires a kind of rationalization as far as appellate mechanism is concerned. Even after some time of the best efforts made by the government to improve the situation, the existing situation has not changed a lot. Previously, government tried to increase the number of tribunals in order to reduce the burden on the conventional judiciary, including high courts and the Supreme Courts. However, tribunals like Intellectual Property Appellate Board were increasing the burden on the system instead. So, the tribunalization system was actually harming the system more than it was actually benefiting it. Thus, the latest ordinance, which was promulgated recently, tries to streamline the tribunal system of the country and bring in the efficiency in the adjudication of the disputes. If you want to read more on the Finance Act 2017, you can go through the PDF provided with this video discussion. The PDF and its link is provided in the description box. You can click on that, download the PDF in Word and the PDF format, and you can read more on this Finance Act. The issues with the tribunals and the current ordinances. Well, Supreme Court in its previous cases, including the L. Chandra Kumar versus Union of India and Roger Matthew versus South Indian Bank Limited, has already criticized the system of tribunalization and the aspect of sending appeals directly from tribunals to the Supreme Court. It simply means that what tribunalization has done, that they have brought a system where cases or the appeals are directly going from the tribunal to the Supreme Courts. This has actually increased the burden of the conventional judiciary rather than reducing it. The court in these cases observed that the tribunals cannot suppress the jurisdiction of the High Court. So what actually has happened? Number of tribunals have increased manifold, and this has reduced the credibility and the accountability of the high courts, and people, including the corporate houses, try to prefer tribunals more than the conventional high courts, and they even try to skip the stage of high court appellate mechanism. However, it is still not sure that bringing the cases before the high court will improve the situation, and this apprehension has kept the parties which are under the dispute away from the high courts. However, the counter view says that if there are already about 4 crore pending cases in the various courts, provision of transferring the cases to the High Court instead of the Supreme Court will burden them further, and this will ultimately burden the Indian judiciary system. The ordinance has also tried to go against the ruling of the Supreme Court, wherein the case of Madras Bar Association versus Union of India, it observed that the minimum term of appointment will be 5 years. So under this case, Supreme Court has ruled that the minimum appointment period under a tribunal should be 5 years. However, the ordinance which was promulgated recently says that it should be 4 years. So they have reduced the time frame by 1 year, and this has itself created a kind of controversy. Well, the next article is related to the GS paper 2 of Indian polity and the constitutional bodies. This article and the discussion based on this article will help you to write a good answer for your mains answer writing. So the more emphasis is given on the mains perspective in this discussion. The author of this argument has argued that ECI or Election Commission of India cannot be a super government. Well, the author himself says that the Election Commission, which is also a constitutional body, should have limited powers in order to bring a kind of reform and constitutionality of an election in a democracy like India. So, as per the author, Election Commission of India should have limited and guided powers. We will keep our discussion for today limited to the issue which the author himself has raised. The Election Commission of India under Article 324 is a constitutional body and constitutional authority. It functions under the Ministry of Law and Justice. So you should never get confused with Ministry of Law and Justice to that Ministry of Home Affairs. It also derives powers from the Representation of People's Act 1950 and 1951. These are the two laws which are directly mentioned in your syllabus. There is no other law which is mentioned in the syllabus except these two laws, and UPSC has multiple times asked question on them. So go through these act in much more details. The role of Election Commission is very well defined. It administers elections to Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha, State Legislative Assembly, State Legislative Councils, and the Office of President and Vice President. On the other hand, the local level or the elections to the municipalities and the panchayats are conducted by the State Election Commission. Initially, Election Commission was seen as a powerless body. However, when T.N. Session became the Chief Election Commission, T.N. Session is one of the most regarded and respected civil servant in India. So you can quote T.N. Session in your ethics paper as well as for your essay paper. Read more about him to write good answer. So when T.N. Session took the charge of Election Commission of India, ECI's powers, which were previously hidden under Article 324, were discovered. Secondly, Supreme Court under Mohinder Singh Gill versus Chief Election Commissioner case held that Article 324 contains plenary powers to ensure free and fair elections, and these are vested in ECI or Election Commission of India, which can take all necessary steps to achieve this constitutional object. Constitutional object here means free and fair election. So under this case, Supreme Court directly and explicitly says that Election Commission under Article 324 can go beyond its mandate, can go beyond its power to ensure that free and fair elections are held across India. And this judgment, along with the activities which were undertaken by T.N. Session, the credibility of Election Commission has increased manifold, and this has allowed the Election Commission to get a good reputation in the constitutional democracy. Issues and confusions with the powers of Election Commission of India. Now, author has argued that there are certain powers which are practiced or which are exercised by the Election Commission. However, they create a kind of confusion also. First, the author has talked about the Model Code of Conduct. The author says Model Code of Conduct was based on the consensus of political parties. It does not have any legal backing or a constitutional act. However, as per paragraph 16A of the Election Symbols Reservation and Allotment Order 1968, Commission or the Election Commission of India has power to suspend or withdraw recognition of a recognized political party if it refuses to observe the Model Code of Conduct. So the confusion is simple. If the Model Code of Conduct is based on the consensus of political party, what allow Election Commission of India to suspend or withdraw a registered political party if not following the Model Code of Conduct? So either there should be a legal backing altogether or the Model Code of Conduct should be removed altogether. The ambiguity should be removed as soon as possible. The second argument made by the Election Commission of India is related to the transfer of the officials which are working on the election duty. It says Election Commission of India can order the transfer of officials if they have any activities which will adversely affect the free and fair election in the state. However, under Article 309 or 309, transfer of official is within the exclusive jurisdiction of the government. So, how can Election Commission of India transfer official if the official's transfer is under the jurisdiction of the government? So if Election Commission of India is facing a problem with a particular employee or an officer working on the election duty, they should not transfer him until and unless getting a final approval from the state government. So this also creates a kind of a controversy. And lastly, the author has argued that no government is allowed by ECI to take any action or administrative or otherwise, if the ECI believes that such actions or decisions will affect the free and fair elections. It simply means that if Election Commission feels that the government of the day is taking policies, parameters, government schemes and other freebies in a manner that can affect the free and fair elections, ECI can take action. On the other hand, the section 1232B of Representation of People's Act 1951 says declaration of public policy or exercise of any legal right will not be regarded as interfering with the free exercise of the electoral rights. Assume this. Before the election, a particular political party in a state announces the distribution of laptop to the students. On one hand, as per section 123, it is allowed because it does not infringe or it does not interfere with the free exercise of electoral rights. On the other side, the Election Commission of India says that it may affect free and fair election. So all these 3 points argued by the authors says that there is a high degree of ambiguity without any clearance on the functioning of Election Commission of India. Author has also argued that we need to go into much details and clarify what are the maximum powers ensured by the Election Commission of India in conducting the elections. Author has argued that neither citizens nor the Election Commission of India is permitted to assume that the Commission has unlimited or arbitrary powers. Hence, it should be concluded that nobody can ever be allowed to assume the absolute unguided power in constitutional democracy, even if it is the constitutional body itself. Now we come to the last part of our discussion, that is question of the day. The answer to the previous question or the yesterday's question is provided on your screen, and the question for today is on the right side. Read the question carefully and answer in the comment box. Thank you very much for being part of the discussion.